It's an absolute pleasure to meet the audience of Harshniyam. I'm Suresh Babu. I work with the Worldwide Fund for Nature in India, studying the river systems and working with different stakeholders to understand the issues and also to rejuvenate rivers and wetlands across the country. When we talk about rivers, the first thing that comes to our mind is that India is a very well-endowed country in terms of rainfall, rich forests, rich wetlands, and rich rivers. This was few years back. Rivers which used to support drinking, irrigation, and other demands of people. It also used to provide nutrient-rich sediments which used to support food production. And India is primarily an agrarian country. We need rivers and sediments and fertile soil for cultivating crops for our ever-growing population. It also used to serve a lot of cultural services. People go to the river, worship, people meditate, people go to wash their sins off, so on and so forth. And rivers are important. And the same rivers support majority of people in the country. As I said, in terms of irrigation, agriculture production, and also inland fisheries, capture fisheries, as we talk about. Very rich biodiversity. We are the home to Ganga River dolphins, Indus River dolphins, Irrawaddy River dolphins, and all iconic, but endangered. Our rivers were homes to gharials, the largest distribution in this part of the world. Birds, avian species, migratory as well. We host a number of winter migrants in our freshwater system, both rivers as well as wetlands. And people say that rivers were part of civilization. Yes, they are part of civilization. But things are changing, despite the large ecosystem values, the services, the level of respect that we have for rivers on one side. On the other side, it's said that rivers are threatened. It's said that out of the large 20 river basins in the country, 14 are under stress conditions. 14 are under stress conditions. And Central Pollution Control Board, who tests river water quality. Water quality is one of the indicators of a healthy river. Says that many stretches in our country are getting polluted and it cannot sustain life. It's also said that more than 50% of the river basins are having double the demand as compared to the supply of water it has. And India is growing. The population is growing, the agriculture production will have to keep pace with the rising population, industrial production, because it supports economy, urbanization. 30% of India's people live in cities. It is predicted to be 50% in the next few years or a decade.
A study by WWF globally has found that 30% of the long rivers doesn't reach the sea due to fragmentation by infrastructure, which includes water abstraction structures like barrages, hydropower dams, and others. This case is same for India as well. Rivers are fragmented by such structures, and it has a huge impact on the flow, the sediment transport, and also the transfer of energy and biodiversity within the river systems, which are important to sustain its function. Therefore, there is a huge impact on the ecosystem services and the life that the river supports.
So what are we trying to do with our rivers? Then they aren't healthy anymore. Now, let me pause here for a while to explain our understanding of what river health means, what a healthy river means. Very fortunate to be working very, very closely with late Professor J.O.K., the father of environmental flows. And now the question is, what is environmental flows? It's quantity, quality, and timing of flows that are required in a river to call it a river. Now, what happens is when you need more water, you need to take out water. So you construct barrages, you construct dams, you construct other diversion structures. So water is taken out for human uses, whereas the river has no water to sustain itself downstream of these structures. I'm sure many of our audience, they have seen leaner rivers downstream of many structures. Now, Professor J. O'Keefe always used to say that, it all depends, what we deal with our rivers depend on what we want the river to be. Okay. Whether we want the river to be a drain, whether we want the river to be healthy and rich in biodiversity, whether we want the river to sustain the ecosystem services for future generations, it's a choice that we have to make. And that's why the discussion on river health becomes very, very important. How do you define river health? Let's understand what makes a river. Understanding the river systems is a bit complicated, but I'm trying to sort of simplify it by saying that, okay, river has a catchment. Somewhere the water will fall, and the water will have to run off into the river. So that area of land is the catchment. Some places the rivers originate from glaciers. Some places it's snow-fed. Some places it is rain-fed. But there are many river systems in our country which are also groundwater-fed, aquifer-fed. So it originates as a small, tiny drop coming out of the land and coming out of the aquifer, and it becomes a river in itself as it flows miles and kilometers downstream. Now, it's up to us as society to think through what we want this river to be in future. So one aspect is the catchment. Second part, of course, the water quality. And water quality is one of the most prominent parameters and indicators that we always correlate the river health with. You must have heard about oxygen levels in water. Okay, how much water is present in the river so that it gets oxygenated, it oxygenates itself, and it purifies itself, and it sustains life. When you put in contaminants, it absorbs water, it oxidizes, and it reduces the oxygen levels in the water that is flowing in the rivers, and therefore a challenge happens. Okay, the water quality deteriorates, oxygen reduces, and in some places mass fish kills happen. Okay, so we have witnessed this in many rivers, whether you take Hyderabad, whether you take Delhi, whether you take Moradabad, whether you take Bangalore, across the country, there are stretches of rivers which are stressed because of poor water quality. There are polyforms. It is actually coming out of the excreta that comes out of our homes. And so we flush in our homes, water finds its way through drains, pipes, and then drains, open drains, and it may end up in a sewage treatment plant, it may not. And if it ends up in a sewage treatment plant, the coliform levels and the BOD, biochemical oxygen demands, gets addressed, and the treated water meets some quality, and it's disposed into the rivers. If it is not treated, the entire waste with high organic content and high coliforms come into the river, and this water is abstracted downstream by communities who are living on the side on the river banks, and they consume it, and it's not good for health. Waterborne diseases gets increased, and that's why the government is now looking at large river rejuvenation programs across the country to address some of the issues which is addressing the water quality issues. There are industrial pollutants, so industries, as all of us know, as reported, not all industries meet the effluent discharge standards. There are standards set by the Pollution Control Board, but the practices are not good enough to meet the standards, and therefore the river gets stressed. So that's the second aspect of water quality. So industry, urban, and agriculture. Agriculture also, a lot of chemicals are used, pesticides, fertilizers. When rain happens, all your chemical fertilizers, the residues it finds its way into the river. And if it doesn't, then it gets into the aquifer and comes back into the river itself. So this is a whole bucket on water quality. The next aspect of river health is the flow in itself, how much water quantity exists in the river. And that's an important parameter that we need to look at. And as I said, water gets diverted, it will get diverted for ever growing demands of water, whether it is in agriculture, whether it is in cities, whether it is in industries. I am reminded of late Professor Ramswamy Iyer, a great advocate of flowing rivers, free flowing rivers in the country. He used to say that we need to first talk about the right of the rivers to flow. The first right of the water should be with the rivers. And currently what's happening is we decide as humans, we decide how much water we need, and the rest should be for the river. And there is a lot of wisdom in his words, because if you don't have the rivers healthy and alive, it will not be able to sustain civilizations. It will not be able to sustain the society for future. And so the third element I would say is the flow health, how much water we have in our rivers to sustain the functions and services of the river. And that's where I want to reintroduce the word environmental flows, Paryavaraniya Prava. Environmental flows, as I said, defined as quantity, quality, and timing of flows. It's not about how much water is flowing in a river. It can be fully filthy water. We are not talking about that. We need good water in the river. It's also about the timing. It's not about having water at one particular time. So many of our rivers have water for 3 months in a year, only during monsoons, only during the flood season. Rest of the years, 9 months, there is no water. That's not a river. Again, I recognize the fact that there are certain rivers which are seasonal. It comes only alive during the rainy season. It sustains for 5 months, 6 months, and then again it becomes dry. We are not trying to make all seasonal rivers perennial. Okay, perennial rivers need to be perennial. Seasonal rivers need to be seasonal. So what we need to look at is how do we ensure the flow health of a river. The fourth aspect of river health is the biodiversity, the life in the river. Whether there is life in the river. So it can have good flow, it can have good quality, but there is no life in the river. Whether there is good fish, prey base, if it is a historic habitat of a mammal like ghadial or dolphins, do they exist these days? What are those indicator species? Are they alive today? Are they present in those rivers? So that's also an important aspect of river health. So, it's a bit challenging because these four aspects, looking at the catchment, looking at the water quality, looking at the flow, looking at biodiversity, that requires different expertise, and therefore it requires different stakeholders to work together, different departments, different ministries to come together. And that's the kind of complication that we have in a river basin management. And quite often, connecting the dots between all these aspects of river health becomes very, very challenging. And that's something that we see generally do not happen. And that's the reason why many efforts looks like piecemeal. And one difference I must point out is the Ganga rejuvenation effort, which actually is trying to take a basin approach. It has tried to bring in various aspects, and let's see how that initiative will shape up. For instance, there is one pillar on biodiversity, which is actually looking at dolphin conservation. It's looking at turtle conservation. It's looking at restoration of critical wetlands in a river basin, etc., etc. When you look at the whole transition, from a Ganga action plan, which looked at purely a sewage treatment program, it has come a long way in looking at the other issues as well. But the challenges are very, very complicated, and one needs to see how this all will come together. Now, here I would again want to raise a couple of issues. So we looked at why is a river getting impacted? Why is a river unhealthy? First issue could be diversion of water. Okay, like we talked about dams, barrages, rivers, etc. Water infrastructure. Second one is the the whole issue of extraction of fish, extraction of sand, and other materials from the river. So because when you over abstract fish, over abstract sand, it leads to other complications. And sand mining is a major issue in many rivers across the country because it destroys the habitats of critical species. It leads to degradation of the river system in itself, leads to erosion, so on and so forth. Similarly, unscientific fishing, indiscriminate fishing also has side effects with a lot of entanglement of dolphins and other species happening in the nets, and also depletion of the prey base, which are important for many of these species. So that's also a major issue. What we need to be worried about is also the land use changes. Here, I want to bring in the whole discussion around wetlands, lakes, ponds. India is dotted with thousands and thousands of wetlands. The smaller ponds and lakes, talabs, as we say, pukurs, so on and so forth. India has about 755,000 of these mapped in a central database, the National Wetland Atlas. They're very, very closely connected to the river systems. Global Wetland Outlook says that more than 37% of our wetlands have been lost since 1970, and that's the same scenario in India as well. We need to. This is important because if wetlands are lost, what we are essentially looking at is that local water security will be impacted. Now you'll ask, okay, why there is a local water security issue here? India is a largely groundwater dependent community. We depend on millions of tube wells, millions of wells. Irrigation, for instance, is said that more than 30 million wells exist for irrigation. And India is the largest groundwater user in the world. So our aquifers are depleting. And if you don't have recharge structures like the wetlands, one of the services that's provided by wetlands is groundwater recharge. And now if the groundwater is not recharged, then where will we go? We can't construct more and more abstraction structures on the rivers because rivers are unhealthy. Rivers don't have water. So where will the water come from? So for local water security and also for regional water security, it's important that we look at wetlands, try and take measures to protect these. Second, we have seen many cities struggling to cope with the changing climate, changes in terms of the precipitation patterns, the duration, the frequency of rains becoming very unpredictable. We are seeing Chennai to Hyderabad to Gurgaon to Delhi to Mumbai coming under water during flood seasons or rainy seasons rather, because we have lost the flood cushioning capabilities because our wetlands are no more there because we have built buildings and bus stands and whatever malls on those wetlands and drainages. And so with no regard to local hydrology construction happening, destroying the drainage basins, destroying the wetlands is not the way to go forward if you were to become more resilient. It's not about just opening a dam or a structure and releasing water. It's also about groundwater, bringing water into the rivers. There is a connection. So surface and groundwater is connected. And therefore, if wetlands are recharging, the groundwater will get replenished and the groundwater will contribute to the base flows in the rivers. There are also scenarios where rivers contribute to the aquifers. But here I'm talking about those aquifers which contribute to the rivers, and this need to be recognized, and therefore the land use planning need to talk to the hydrology. We need to correspond, because why I'm highlighting this is because as we urbanize, we will see massive land use changes, and that land use changes need to be determined based on the hydrology and the drainage of a particular area. So wetlands, very, very, very important. And we are seeing degradation in wetlands, and therefore the health of the river will go down. And this is a trend that we need to reverse. So we talked about water diversions. We talked about extraction, that is fish, the mining, etc. We talked about land use changes, and we talked about wetlands. So, and what else? Pollution. The problem here is that as we move into a large piped water supply society, Okay. I'm having assured water supply in my home. I'm talking about cities. Okay. So there is a disparity between cities and rural areas. So I'm not talking about rural areas. They're much more conservative and careful in terms of their water use as compared to cities. And I think there is a great opportunity for us and the people who live in cities to measure their water and usage and try and optimize it. Otherwise, look at it, 50% people in India living in cities, everyone wanting to use more than 200 liters per capita per day. It's going to add to two issues. One, more water will have to be taken out from our rivers and aquifers. Second, we will have to put out more waste into our rivers, adding and compounding to our pollution issues. And this is not going to be a sustainable way forward for us. Same with agriculture. We've been talking about more crop drop. There have been many initiatives, but still, there's a large part of our society which is believing in uh, very old practices in agriculture, and that again needs to be sort of addressed, because again, more chemicals and more fertilizers used lead to thirsty soils, and thirsty soils absorb more water.